Dan, thanks again for talking to us. I'd like to ask you about burnout now. Again, a term that's bandied about in the media and by coaches and athletes. What could people watching this, what should they understand by, or what do sports psychologists understand by the term burnout?
Yeah, I think you hit an important point. People have a lot of different meanings. Sometimes when somebody leaves a sport or discontinues a sport and stops playing, oh, they burned out. Sometimes that's the case, and sometimes it's not. I stopped playing the sport because it wasn't fun or other types of things.
Sure.
Burnout occurs when what was once an enjoyable activity no longer becomes enjoyable because you've been under long-term constant stress.
Right. So two features really, a change and long-term stress.
Yeah, one key thing is it's got to be something enjoyable from the front end, something you liked, but then because of stress over time, it shifts from I liked it to now the stress has kind of weighed me down and my liking and my motivation is dropping, even though I used to like it.
Yes. So my question, how does it happen? I think we've probably touched on that already in terms of defining it. So can I ask you, how can we recognize it? Is it very obvious to people, or can it be hidden sometimes?
It can be hidden, and actually I'll go back because in terms of what causes burnout, it can be caused, we did a study and found in tennis players who burned out, it could be caused by internal factors like perfectionism. They had to be perfect all the time,
right.
And that generated this constant stress to be perfect. And it was perfectionism with a concern for mistakes tied in.
Right.
We also found some players had like a crazy or pushy parent that just always on their case and criticizing them from what they did. And some it was physically driven. They didn't get enough sleep, they didn't eat right, and they pushed themselves.
Right.
So stress can come from a lot of different sources.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And can we recognize, is it easy to recognize?
No, burnout, in terms of recognizing burnout, it can be difficult. Sometimes a coach can see it because you get a performance drop despite the training, or you get people, they don't show up excited for training anymore. Sometimes it's more psychological.
Right.
They're losing their motivation, or you get a performance drop. But sometimes the person doesn't know they're burning out.
Right.
So one thing we found is coaches, especially with like younger kids in the junior sport, burnout has a really negative connotation. People don't want to say like, I burned out.
Sure.
So coaches will ask kids that had actually burned out, and is everything okay? And they'll say fine. So what we've taught coaches to do is to look for some symptoms that I mentioned before, but then don't settle for like, are you,
I'm okay.
You kind of come back, now something's up, you're tired, let's go sit down for a while and it's real, and kind of make sure you really explore it with a young person.
Sure. Almost like people don't want to think about mental illness as something they can recognize.
There's kind of what we call a fancy word, but a stigma with it.
Okay, great. And of course the million-dollar question, how do we prevent it? Can we prevent it?
Yeah, I think burnout's preventable on a couple fronts. One is it can be sort of internally driven. So if I'm a perfectionist person, usually it's not being a perfectionist in terms of standards, but it's not being able to deal with mistakes and failure. So I might work with like a sports psychologist on how to live with mistakes and not like them, but as the famous basketball coach John Wooden said, they're the building blocks of success. Or how to, after practice, one coach talked about, I'd park my sport stuff at the end of the court and then leave and pick it up the next day. So when I go home, I'm a regular person.
Right.
So some of it's that way. A part of it ties to physical training.
Right.
If somebody's overtraining or depending on the age of the athlete, they're in 3 teams and they're going and they don't take breaks. So physiologists will tell us, sport physiologists, you want a periodized training plan and you want to use good science if you're a swimmer and take breaks. You need to work really hard, but you take train hard and smart, take appropriate breaks. And finally, if it's sort of driven by crazy coaches and parents, That's where coaches' education comes in. And I use crazy in a nice way, because many times the parent who's pushy, etc., really loves their child.
Of course.
They just think the strategies they're using are wrong. From what we've learned. So how to educate that parent, how to work with that parent to understand that.
Sure. You've mentioned the term perfectionism a couple of times in what you've been saying. And maybe people out there will think perfectionism's a bad thing. But is there a good kind of perfectionism? Are there different kinds of perfectionism?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because most people, when you hear perfectionist, that's like a criticism. Yet we see a lot of Olympic champions have perfectionistic tendencies, but we also see people who burn out have perfectionistic tendencies. And when they look at perfectionism, it's really about setting standards and going for it, and a lot of times there's an organization component. All perfectionists have that. Sometimes they'll go good or bad perfectionist, or maladaptive and adaptive. The good or adaptive perfectionist has the high standards and usually the organization, but they don't get too concerned with mistakes, and they don't get too concerned, if they're younger, with parental evaluation. The maladaptive, or sort of bad perfectionism, you set in high standards, you maybe have the organization component, but you have this tremendous fear of mistakes, etc., and other evaluation that would be negative. So you run around all day setting high standards and then beat yourself up about it. I've worked with some young people, one 20s and one younger, that were perfectionists. It took a couple of years, but it's sort of almost a philosophical shift to learn. And I explain it this way. Perfectionism is your greatest strength, and it's your Achilles heel. Because if you're 18, you're not going to get rid of your perfectionistic tendencies. You just need to recognize it can be a real strength in this and this and this. But if I don't learn how to deal with it and turn it off, if I don't learn how to let go of mistakes. So sometimes it's as simple as you got 24 hours after the game to feel bad. You go home, beat yourself up, and then we flush the toilet and have all the you-know-what leave, and we rebuild after 24 hours.
No, that sounds sensible. And another area where sports psychologists can help. Just returning to the burnout issue, I'm not sure we can give an answer to this, but I wonder if we'll be able, as spectators, to see burnout in the Olympics that are coming up soon?
I don't think you'd be able to see burnout in the Olympics. You'll be able to see some poor performances, maybe as a result of overtraining. Announcers will come up with all sorts of things, but you never know if a marathoner, was it their training plan was wrong? In our country, we just had the Boston Marathon, and the heat was higher than ever, so people dropped out all over. If you had a 90-degree Fahrenheit day in London, people are going to be, So I don't think you can see it. There'll be some speculation.
Right. And again, one of our problems in psychology is pretending that we can understand exactly what's going on in somebody's head, and we must avoid that desire to think we know everything.
I'll tell you a funny story. Many years ago, I worked with a professional race driver who was having negative thoughts. He was going through a terrible divorce, and there's a technique called thought stopping, where you write down your specific negative thoughts, then you have a signal like a stop sign that would stop it, and then you have some replacement thoughts. Because he's going 200 miles an hour left, having negative thoughts, and he could kill somebody, including himself. And his negative thought, or his thought stopping mechanism, was an elephant. And I never had anybody come up with an elephant, because he won this big race we have in America in NASCAR. It's not Formula One, but it's called the Daytona 500.
Oh, we know it well.
And they put him on an elephant after he won it. And he said everybody got out of the way, and it was black, not gray. And in his car, they have the cameras in the car now, and on what they call the row bar that comes down, he had an elephant. And I had to laugh, because the sport announcers were going, in our country, the Republican Party are elephants, and they go, he's a Republican, and all it was is his stop signal. So when he saw it, he had a cue to think stop.
Yeah, false attributions. Thanks again, Dan, for your insights and your expertise.
Thank you.